right, so high tunnel winterization and maintenance. This is a picture of along the edge of one of my high tunnels this past year when we had that ice and snow event. I would say I probably had maybe I don't know, 1/16 of an inch of ice, and it was making the structure lean a bit. So there was a lot of square footage up there. This is after I started knocking some ice off. But it was clinging on there pretty tight, and it was a lot of weight on the tunnel. Before we get started, I'm going to thank all of our partners out there, all the other agencies that support the work we do and collaborate with us on our service to the region. Of course, we are a program of Berea College here in Berea, Kentucky. I'm glad to be part of that Berea College family. A portion of our funding does come from the Kentucky Ag Development Fund. Some tobacco settlement dollars hard at work. Those funds pay for Chris and another staff member to go out and help folks do some on-the-farm planning, production planning, trying to increase revenues and profit margins for producers. And then we're working with USDA-NIFA on a beginning farmer grant. That's our beginning farmer education series. And that series will get started. Sign up will start November 1st and we'll go through November 30. So if you'd like to attend that beginning farmer class, either shoot us an email or a message. And we'll put you on the waiting list, and or you can just wait and click on the link there on the Grow Appalachia website come November. And then we do a lot of work with NRCS in Kentucky, especially. NRCS is funding high tunnels across the state. We've probably got some of the highest density of high tunnel numbers, certainly in the Southeast. But probably in the country, if you pull California off the map. But they've been a great partner. They work really hard to get high tunnels out there to producers that are going to utilize them. But so thanks to our partners, they've been a big help in moving this work along. This is the team here tonight. Kayla Preston's our social enterprise manager. Kayla manufactures and installs high tunnels, also sells fertilizer and other garden management supplies, drip irrigation, road cover, insect netting, that sort of stuff. And then we've got Chris McKenzie, who's our small farm production advisor. Chris goes out and works on farms with farmers, like I previously mentioned, does soil testing, helps identify disease issues, nutrition management, all those critical pieces of producing products for the farm market. And then of course me, I'm here with you, and I'll take up the least amount of your time tonight. Kayla and Chris are the real pros, but I'll share a little bit about what I know about tunnels. All right, so I'm gonna get us kicked off talking about structural considerations for your high tunnel. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I figure a lot of you are already growing in tunnels, but there's some things to think about. One, if you're going to be buying a new high tunnel, or two, if you're managing an existing tunnel that may be affected by winter weather. So obviously this is not what we want to see out in the field after we get some snow or ice on our tunnel. And depending on the way the structure is put together, this could have been a little bit of snow or it could have been a lot. Not sure what the inside of that tunnel looked like prior to the snowfall. So the weight of ice and snow. So the picture on the left with that glove, that's some of the ice that came off my high tunnel, and that actually looks more like 1/8 of an inch or better. But ice weighs a lot. So you can see the chart over here on the right. The wet snow is a little closer to the weight of ice. The dry snow is pretty light. So for 1 inch of ice on a standard tunnel, a lot of our tunnels are 30 foot wide, 96 foot long. So that's roughly about 2,880 square feet, or it is that many. And you're looking at 5 pounds per square foot for 1 inch thick of ice. So if you got 1 inch of ice all over the roof of that tunnel, then you're going to have close to 14,000 pounds of ice on top of that tunnel. And so that gives you some idea of the weight that's exerted from all of that ice. A 1/4 inch of ice is a much more likely event. So you're looking at 3,600 pounds of ice on top of that structure. So still plenty to be very dangerous and definitely detrimental to your structure. Snow, on the other hand, it can be really light snow. So the same 6 inches of light snow or snow that doesn't have a lot of water in it is going to be about a tenth of what wet snow can be. So for 6 inches of snow, you can have between 4,000 pounds and up to 30,000 pounds of weight on top of that tunnel, depending on the type of snow. So I just wanted to share this, not that you need to remember these numbers, but just so you understand that accumulation of ice and snow on the tunnel it weighs a lot more than you think it does, than it appears in any 1 square foot when you're looking at your tunnel. I'm sure I could have said that more eloquently, but it's heavy. That ice is heavy. So some of the components of the tunnel. So your ground post and really any of your structure can have a gauge of roughly 17 gauge down to about 12 gauge. And the gauge is a reference for the thickness of the metal along any one side. So to give you this is a little chart for gauges, and it gives you a decimal equivalent. So the lower the number, the heavier the wall of the pipe. And so around 16 to 17 gauge, that's roughly about a 1/16 of an inch thick. And then between 12 and 13 gauge is roughly about 1/8 of an inch. The thicker your pipe, the more structurally stable it's going to be. And it's just going to give you more strength when you have that snow load on the structure. Your tunnel should have 4-foot spacings on your ground post and your bows. Some high tunnel manufacturers are selling 6-foot spacing on your ground post and your bows. And for Kentucky, that's just a little too far apart. The farther those bows and ground posts are apart, the more sag you can have in your plastic, which means the more snow and ice that can load up on the roof. So make sure if you're buying a new tunnel or installing a new tunnel, make sure you select a 4-foot spacing on your structural components. So obviously these bowed pieces of metal are your bows. This is your hip board along here. And then one of the most important pieces, depending on the size of your tunnel, are your truss systems, which are these cross braces here. They kind of go up at like a V or a W in some cases. So they hang off of the bow itself. But as the pressure is exerted on that bow, it puts pressure on this cross piece here on your truss. And that helps support the load of that weight of the snow or ice. And the goal there is to have a unified structure. And so each one of these components, as we as we build out the tunnel, the ground posts connected to the baseboards, the hoops or the bows connected to the ground post, and those are bolted or Tex screwed in. Then you've got your hip boards that are bolted to your bows. And then you have your trusses up top on your bows and some cross supports. And the more of those supports you have, the more unified your structure is going to be, and the more capable it is going to be able to manage the weight of snow and ice on your tunnel, and wind for that matter as well. All right, so some considerations. We get this question fairly often. If you expect a windstorm, the best course of action is to seal the tunnel up as much as possible. So you want to roll your sides down to prevent that wind from coming in and under the tunnel, under the plastic. You want to close your doors up and make sure that they're secured. Do your best to close up any air gaps, because what can happen is that when those high winds come in, if they can get in and under this plastic, it'll act like a big sail, and it can just pull the ground post right out of the ground. Or it'll pull the bows, it'll break bolts. It's significant amount of uplift when you get those high winds coming in. So make sure you close everything up. And as you prepare for heavy snow, some things that are important to consider is to be able to visit your tunnel regularly to remove the snow. Depending on the size of your tunnel, your roof line is going to be, up to 14 feet high in some tunnels, some of the larger tunnels, and then some of the smaller 15-foot wide tunnels, you're around 8 or 9 feet high. So you got to think of ways to be able to reach up there and push that ice and snow off to reduce some of that accumulation. This fellow's he's down in North Carolina. He's using just a landscape brake to help push up on the plastic. You also don't want to poke holes in your plastic if you can stand it. So some folks will use brooms, dust brooms, just whatever you have, but think about it ahead of time so you got that tool handy when you need to move that snow off of the roof. If your tunnel is going to be in a place that you can't access, if there's a lot of ice and snow, then you might add some additional supports for those times when you can't get in there. So with this small tunnel here, they were able to add in some piece together 4x4s or sandwich 2x4s. That's going to be harder and harder the taller your tunnel gets. But if you get in there and put some additional supports, and that's the best you can do, then that's all you can do. But if you have access to your tunnel, you should get out there and move that snow off. All right. Make sure you have insurance. So these tunnels are anywhere from $7,000 to $20,000 and more if you want, all the bells and whistles that are available. You may need to ask for a specific rider for your high tunnel and the associated equipment. So make sure you have this conversation with your insurance agent. And make sure that the high tunnel and the associated components that you want protected or insured are listed as insured. We've talked to some folks that were told their tunnel was insured, but after the snow and ice damage, they were told that it was not actually a farm structure that was covered. Each insurance agent is going to treat that differently, and maybe there was a different circumstance in their situation, but you need to make sure that the tunnel's listed and the potential damage is listed, so, or the source of the damage. So, you know, for wind damage and or ice, snow, hail, storm damage, basically. So make sure that that's covered on your insurance. And those riders are generally not expensive, but it, you know, it's just like car insurance is going to fluctuate depending on which your insurance company you're working with. All right. If there's any questions about the structural piece, I'm glad to take those on now. But if not, I will turn things over to Kayla. Kayla or Chris, did you see anything pop up in the chat?
Well, Mark, there were some questions about, you know, picture in there with a high tunnel that had, it was the one where they were pushing snow off the roof, and it had some bags in there. And there were some questions about what those bags are, what they're for.
Gotcha. Does anybody have a guess? You can unmute if you want. Howard got it. That is correct. They're growing oyster mushrooms in those bags over the winter. So it just stays warm enough in that high tunnel to grow oysters. And I guess the light is low enough. But yep, you got it, Howard. You won the gold star.
And
all right, well, I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Well, one other note I just wanted to add, Mark, is that some folks are going to be dealing with high tunnels that have a dual layer of plastic. And so on that structural piece, just making sure that your inflation blower is going at all times if you have that dual layer, particularly when it's there's a windstorm or when there's a threat of snow. Because if that inflation blower isn't going, your plastic's going to be either drooping or loose on the structure. If it's a single layer of plastic, oftentimes it's pulled tight enough to where it doesn't matter. But with a double layer, they don't pull it tight so they can have that air gap where that blower blows air into it. And so just make sure that inflation blower is going, because once it stops, it kind of goes flat and snow can accumulate or wind can blow that loose plastic around and cause damage.
Thank you, Chris. Yep, that's a good point. All right. There's no more questions. I'll turn it over to Kayla.
Okay, well, and if you all do come up with questions while I'm presenting on the subjects that Mark was talking on, feel free to always drop them in the chat. I'm gonna share my screen here and hope that it is the proper screen that I'm sharing. Chris or Mark, does that look correct? Yes, good. Okay. All right, well, I am Kayla Preston. I am the social enterprise manager for Grow and have been on the team since 2016. I do a lot of different things. I'm pretty much the sales department at Grow Appalachia. So I manage the high tunnel enterprise, as well as all of the garden supplies that we offer, including drip irrigation and water catchment pieces, materials, and distribute those out to folks in the area, as well as ship them and, you know, hand them off to Chris to deliver to Hindman if he's heading to Hindman, or, you know, we kind of distribute it the best way that we can, but shipping is an option as well as pickup. And then we also distribute about 44,000 pounds of organic chicken litter fertilizer every year. And that's around the Appalachia region. So that's amongst our partner site coordinators and our partners, as well as just folks in the area that need it for their gardens. So tonight, I'm going to be focusing on the water catchment and irrigation piece of winterizing your high tunnel. A lot of you may have water catchment systems or micro drip irrigation in your tunnel, and some of you may not. there's a lot of different things that need to be done in order to properly take care of your water catchment or your irrigation systems during the winter. One mainly being, are you going to be producing in the tunnel or not producing in the tunnel? So here's a picture of the water catchment system that I am going to be talking about this evening. This is the standard roof runoff water catchment practice that the USDA NRCS funds and works with very closely. Probably with a lot of you all, I've seen a lot of your names pop up, and I'm very familiar that you all do have tunnels and water catchment as well. So these gutters here are the vinyl PVC gutters. They are really versatile. They're easy to pop in, pop out. They just work really well on these tunnels. Some of you may have metal gutters. I'm not going to be touching on metal gutters tonight or how to take those off of your tunnel. I personally do not have any experience with metal gutters, but can probably find some resources for you all if you do have those questions. I can assume though that a lot of these practices and processes that I'm going to go through are similar as well on the metal gutters. So yeah, this is a standard. This is our assistant Tara installing the trench and the plumbing. So that's what it looks like in the ground. If none of you all have seen kind of how this is put together initially, and then the gutters run into your tanks, which catch the water, and then that feeds into the tunnel where your pump and filter are located, and they then feed into your drip tape and your main line. So that's what's going to be irrigating your crops, if you all aren't familiar with what this looks like. So why do we catch water off of our tunnels? Or, you know, why is the government paying for us to do this? It's for conservation. It's to slow the water. It's to create conservation within the high tunnel practice itself. So as you all know, as high tunnel producers, there's lots of water that comes off of the tunnel that needs to be figured, you know, needs something to be done with. So the picture here is just some standing water in a tunnel. Obviously it's rained a lot, and that water is just standing because of the soil and what the soil is made out of and where the tunnel is specifically located. It's located on the bottom of a hill and in a really low lying area to where water just stands quite quickly, even after a very small rain. So you want to think about erosion and drainage control. You want to think about how this slows the water cycle, how you're holding on to it and you're using it a different way. You know, you're actually putting it back into the tunnel where you're stopping water from going into originally. So it makes sense just to capture that water off of the tunnel and use it. You can use it in the tunnel itself, or you could use it around the tunnel if you all have surrounding gardens and things like that. So it just makes sense. It's cheaper than, you know, paying your monthly municipal or your county supply. And you could also use it just as a supplemental secondary source. So I would not rely on water catchment just as your only source of watering or, you know, water source. You're definitely going to want a different avenue as well. So either that's municipal, or if you've got, you know, other options, ponds, things like that. So, and just so you all have a point of reference, so a standard high tunnel, like a 30 by 96, just with 1 inch of rain, you can collect up to 1,600 gallons. So it's a lot of water to capture and to do a lot with. So like I said, there's 2 different avenues to go. If you're going to stay in production, that's one way. And so you may or may not want your gutters on or off, or your drip tape pulled out. And then there's the second option, which is not being in production and having the tunnel lay dormant over the winter, which is probably what the most of you all are going to do. And that's actually what I'm going to cover. Chris is going to go into a bit more detail on staying in production and managing your crops and things like that after I'm finished up here. So I'm going to focus on removing our gutters and how we do that. preparing our tanks for a hard freeze so they don't bust. That's including your PVC trench and things like that, as well as draining your system, removing your pump, and properly storing those things. So my next slide here is some photos of the flap. So I'm sure a lot of you all have either dealt with this plastic tape flap or not. This is the standard way that we as high tunnel producers and installers create an avenue for the water to run directly off of the high tunnel plastic and into the gutter. If you do not put any sort of flap down, you're going to lose a huge percentage of water just down in between that gutter and your roll-up curtain. And it's just, you're gonna have both issues. You're gonna be catching the water and then not catching some of it and still dealing with the drainage issues. So as you see here, this is kind of the process when you're first installing the plastic roll. And there's many different ways you can attach this to your gutter. So those of you who do have the tunnel and do have this flap, some may be just taped directly to the gutter from your high tunnel plastic. Some of your all's flaps may be a batten strip, which is what you see on the far right here. That is a non-sticky woven plastic. It's really thick, it's woven, so it lasts longer. And that's why you see that I put a roofing screw through here. So this is how we keep our flaps to our gutters throughout the season. And then it's also super easy to remove at the end of the season when you're ready to pop those gutters out. If you do something like just taping your patch tape roll to your gutter and to your tunnel, then you're going to have to remove the tape or partially remove it from the gutter. And it's most likely not going to be reusable the following year, which creates more labor for you because you're going to have to go back and redo the plastic tape, or you're going to also have to pay for it, which these rolls of tape are not cheap because they're UV stable. A 6-inch wide roll that comes in 50 feet long run you roughly $25, and that's not including the shipping if you have to get it shipped. And they're not light because it's like a really heavy duty roll with a lot of paper on the back that you eventually have to trash. So these are just a couple of different pictures I wanted to share with you all. The other things that I've seen are folks either using some form of weight and attaching it to the plastic flap, like fishing lures I've seen, or people actually weave like a woven, they weave cable through the plastic flap and they attach it from one end wall to the other, keeping it weighted down. So here's a couple of pictures of the gutters actually removed. This is a tunnel down at the Brea Urban Farm on the right, and on the left is a tunnel we just installed down at Silver Creek Elementary School here in Brea. So I just wanted to kind of show you all a brand new catchment system and an older looking one. I mean, they're in the sun all year. They're not meant to be too pretty year round. So, but the big ugly thing is if you do not pull your gutters off and you do allow for snow to stay in there and freeze in there, you have the potential to rip your brackets in half, like break them in half to where the gutter falls down, all your brackets are broken, and you've got a huge mess to clean up. You're gonna have to unscrew all your brackets from your hipboard and reinstall. And so I just wanted to kind of give you a point of reference just to look at this broken bracket down here on the bottom right, because they do break easily. And when you are popping these out, you want to think about how cold it is outside. It's best to mess with this plastic and you know, pop your brackets out or pop your gutters out when the plastic's when it's a warmer day, because I mean, it's just like anything else. Plastic becomes very brittle when it's cold, and you're more capable of breaking your brackets. I mean, I don't want to make them seem like they're very, very brittle, because they're not. They're rough they bend, they ebb, they flow, but I just want to make you all aware of that. And then also when you're storing them, you want to store your gutters out of the sun. Over time, as we all know, plastic breaks down. And so that's going to cause some issues down the road. Also take a picture of your downspout assembly, just in case they do come apart or you have to store them separately. And so you know how they go together. Well, I guess this video will also be on YouTube for your all's reference as well. So that's great. For those of you who do not have a high tunnel yet, and we're talking about running water down your hip boards to a tank, you want to think about the slope that your tunnel's on, and is there a natural slope on one side or the other of the tunnel, and is that where you want your tanks? If not, you're going to have to slope your gutters going downhill or down slope, whichever way you want them to go, and roughly you're going to need it to drop about every 3 inches every 100 feet. So just keep that number in mind. So next I'm going to show you all a video of me popping out these gutters. I hope that it works. I know some of us are on minimal bandwidth, but here we go. Okay, so that's it pretty much. That's as simple as that. The downspout area with the end caps is a little bit more difficult because once that plastic gets locked in there in the end cap, it can be really difficult to move around or pop in or pop out. But the warmer it is, and the warmer that plastic is, the easier it is to move it around. And so as you saw in that video, I was popping the gutter on the bracket side closest to you. I was popping that out, up and out, and then pulling it out from the hip board. I mean, if you think about it, there's not much give or take on that hip board. It's there and it's not moving. So it's easier to try to bend that outer piece of the bracket compared to trying to bend the inside piece. So that's it on gutters. I'm going to keep on boogieing, moving on to micro irrigation just because I'm looking at my clock here. But if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or just ask me when we're done. So yeah, this is just a picture of a finished gutter with the flap on and the tape on. It's looking pretty good. So the next piece is, we're still working on the outside of the high tunnel. So we've got our gutters taken care of. The next thing is to work on our water catchment tanks. So the tanks themselves and the screen baskets that are in the top of the tanks in the manhole entry. And then working on getting your trench cleaned out. And then we will eventually move into the tunnel where your pump is located and all the drip tape and things like that. So this isn't necessarily talking about winterizing your high tunnel, but this is an issue that I see a lot with water catchment systems. And so those of you who don't yet have water catchment on your tunnel or do and have an issue or considering getting a tunnel and don't know what height to put your hip boards and stuff, depending on what catchment tank that you're interested in using or have as a resource, you're going to really want to pay attention to the height of your hip board. As you see the picture to the left here, there's really not much room to get your lid pulled out from under the hip board. There's not a lot of room to get your screen basket in and out of there. And definitely not a lot of room for you yourself to get in that hole if you had to clean it out or anything of that nature. The picture on the right is more of an ideal height. It definitely doesn't need to be that height. But I would say a good 8 inches above the top of your tank is best bet for ease of working with in and out of the water catchment tanks. So these tanks are the standard ones. These are the 550 gallon drums that most of you have. They are 44 inches tall. So that's just, I wanted to write that down so you all could quickly jot that down, just so you know that your hip board needs to be at least 4 feet tall, or 4.5 feet tall if you can. So this is the basket that I was talking about. You couldn't really see it that well in the previous picture. These baskets are made for these tanks. I have not seen these baskets anywhere else, and they're not cheap. If you lose one of these baskets, it's going to cost you roughly $75, and that's not including shipping. So, I mean, it's just a piece of plastic with a screen around it. You can probably make them for cheaper than that, but they're really awesome to have. They fit the manhole perfectly. They're sturdy. They're not going to fall in the hole. I believe that plastic is UV stable, because I've never seen them warped too bad. And it's serving a really, really good purpose. It's keeping all of the super big debris, leaves, twigs, things like that out of your tank, which is eventually going to go into your PVC and through your pump and all of that. And it's also keeping your mosquito larvae out of there, which is something that none of us ever want. And then with the baskets, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, especially once we get into the drip and orchard tubing and all of that, you're going to want to sanitize this stuff when you're storing it. Just spraying it down with a quick sanitizer, food grade sanitizer, vinegar. Sitting it out in the sun does a lot too. You just want to think about all of the bacteria and the algae and all that that's just been built up over the season. And you're going to want to clean that off before you store it for the following season. Just as, best practices for the following, for your following crops. Just, you never know what's going to stay on all those materials. So, and I will go into draining the system shortly, but once you drain the system, then you're definitely going to want to shut your ball valves at the bottom of each tank. Oh, one other thing, I'm sorry. I wanted to mention this. So if you all do have children, we've actually screwed these baskets to the side of the tanks to where they can't be easily pulled out by a child or, somebody that's trying to tamper with your stuff. You could just use a couple of screws and just, do a couple of contact points around. It's easily put in and easily pulled out when you all are ready to pull those out for the season. So those tanks and your pump, as you all know, the pump pulls the water from your tanks just fine. Once you get down to a certain height on your tanks of water, that your pump that you have is not going to pull out the water anymore. So you're going to have to figure out, well, am I just going to be okay with leaving it there? Am I going to get in the tank myself and use a bucket and get the rest of that water out? Or am I going to go, be above and beyond and get a different form of a pump to get that last bit of water out? As you all know, on those tanks, the bottom on the outlet there's a little bit, there's probably like 4 inches of water that's going to sit below that valve, and that's going to sit at the bottom of your tank. I don't necessarily think in Kentucky, I mean, we do get some hard freezes. I don't think it's necessarily going to ruin your tank, but for best practices, it's not going to hurt to drop one of these pumps in your tank if you have them on hand anyway. And they're also not that expensive if you're interested in investing in one. So you're going to want to think about how versatile this pump is. Can you use it on different parts of your farm, multi-use? You want to think about the price. Just, if you don't have a lot of money to spend on something like this, then maybe your best bet is just one of these small drill pumps. Those things are about $15. You can order them online or go to pick them up at Ace. But and then the durability too. So if you're going to invest in a pump like this second one here, the bilge pump, that blue one, that's just your standard submersible pump. Those can run you $1,550 to $200-$300 depending on how good of one that you want. And then this last one here is a trash pump. Obviously that looks like it's a bit more expensive. I've never worked with a trash pump, but as these 3 go on, you can pick up more and more debris. I mean, you can pretty much pump mud with that trash pump, and the trash pump is very expensive. I mean, it's about $1,000, but for those of you who have silage tarps in your fields, I don't know how big they are, but if you've ever tried to move a really heavy silage tarp with a bunch of water on it, super difficult. So you could use a pump like this, like the drill pump, for instance, that you just attach to your standard battery powered drill and get some water from the tops of those silage tarps. So like I said, multi-use is something to really think about when you're going through the considerations of which pump to buy. But yeah, I mean, they're all self-explanatory. You're gonna suck the water out of the pump, or excuse me, out of the tank with this piece of this side of the hose on the drill pump, and the same goes for that bilge submersible pump. You'll just drop the pump in, and then it'll just suck it right out. And that last one there, of course, you would need 2 different sides of the hose. But just to give you all an idea of different pumps that you can use to get that water out of there. Okay, so next is talking about micro drip irrigation systems. This is the second practice of our high tunnel that most of you do have. The first would be the water catchment, and then now our drip. There's a lot of different intricacies of how to clean up your drip irrigation system and how in depth you want to get with it. But before I start going into how to clean that up and get it winterized for the season, I just want to make sure you all are aware of what I'm talking about when I say micro irrigation. So I'm talking about the drip tape, these black lines that you're seeing in this tunnel. I'm talking orchard tubing as well. So some of you may have, you know, different types of irrigation in your tunnel, as well as just the standard header line with your fittings and the pump, which is the sand filter pump that I'm specifically talking about tonight. These systems are also approved by the USDA NRCS. So some of you have probably gotten that upfront payment to install this system and to pay for the upfront materials, the initial materials. They do not pay you every year. So this is another reason why maintenance and winterizing and storing your drip irrigation materials are really important, because they can get pricey. It's not really that much work to clean them up and put them away. And it's going to help with the longevity of your system. So just to touch base on, you know, why we do use drip irrigation, or why we do direct soil contact irrigation, is for conservation, right? Same thing as what we addressed earlier with water catchment. We're conserving, we're slowing the water cycle. We're working smarter, not harder. We're thinking about all the different factors into overhead watering, or, you know, watering with a watering can, and, you know, things like that. So you're using up to 50% less water when you are directly irrigating the soil compared to overhead watering. You're saving time. Instead of standing there, you know, holding the hose, you just flip the switch or turn the hose on. You know, that goes to the main line, and then you don't have to hand water. You can also install a timer. We've installed several timers on our systems, and there can be a timer also installed on those pumps that you could turn the timer on and walk away, and it'll shut off for you, and you don't have to worry about overwatering or leaving the water on and all of that. And, you know, nowadays they've got timers with smartphone applications. You can turn your water off from the movie theater if you had to, you know, things like that. So I think drip is really just a wonderful way to save money. It's a great way to be efficient with your time. There is some upfront investment, as well as education. I mean, just like anything else in the world, we're going to have to do a little bit of grunt work to figure out all the benefits. So, yeah. And then it also only waters that needs it. You know, as you all see here, you can directly see which part of the ground is wet and what is not. So that leads me into the plant health side of why we irrigate. As you all know, especially things like tomatoes and things like that do not like moisture on the foliage. And so since this is directly irrigating the soil, you're not having to deal with disease, you know, moisture-borne diseases. So you're going to get less blight on your plants. You're also going to have less weeds. Like I said, you're only irrigating what you're hoping to grow. So you're going to see only weeds popping up or more weeds popping up where you're irrigating. And it's going to be a huge game changer if you are overhead watering and watering your paths and watering the sides of the tunnel and wherever your water goes, if you're doing that. So yeah, just something to keep in mind here. And then, you know, why do we winterize? Well, if we're not going to be using it, it's just like storing your tools properly. It's just like, you know, you don't leave your hoe or your shovel in the garden, or you may have to replace the handle every year. But, you know, if you're not going to be using it, you might as well put it up. The other really great things about putting all this stuff up is you're reducing it from the sun exposure. So you're increasing the longevity of your materials. I don't know how many years you all have been producing, but you may have also noticed that mice and rodents get into your materials and can cause a huge mess for you to find at the worst time of year, when all you need to do is irrigate the crops that have been in the tunnel for too long. If you've been waiting because you don't know if it's going to be freezing still or not. Yeah. And then also you can overwinter lots of diseases and potentially pests by leaving those materials in the field. So nobody wants that stuff in a brand new crop that you've, you know, been growing since seed and all of that. And then also just the residual water that stays in the drip irrigation tubing. All that stuff is like micro walls and zigzags and stuff like that. And so if there's any water that's left in there, it's going to freeze and probably break your line. So if you do leave them in the field, you're definitely going to want your emitters facing up, which is the blue lines. Face those up. You want those face up regardless, but definitely want those facing up so the water drips down. So this is the Intex sand filter pump that I'm talking about here. It's actually a pool pump filter for like an in-ground or out-of-ground pool. But also works really well with filtering out all the really big debris, and then actually gets into all those little micro debris by filtering it through the sand. So, and I'm going to show you how to take that apart here in a sec, but this is another big piece. This is the part that's connected right next to the pump. So now we've entered the high tunnel. We're talking about outside high tunnel stuff. Now we're talking about inside the high tunnel. This is your manifold, your assembly. I've heard people call it many different things. It looks like a mess. It's a lot of different pieces that may not make a lot of sense to you. There's a lot of irrigation pieces mixed in with a lot of like standard hose fittings and a mixture of PVC fittings. And so it can get really confusing and really overwhelming, and I totally understand that. First off, I would recommend you take a picture before you take it apart, so you know exactly how to put it back together come the next season. And then you're going to want to wash all of these pieces. So dropping them in a big bucket with some sanitizer, or, you know, just trying to get off the majority of whatever is stuck on there. You can use a bristle brush, an old toothbrush. Just really try to get that stuff cleaned up and then dry it, you know, sit it out in the sun, make sure it's fully dry. And then, you know, these pieces are so small, you could get a little Tupperware container, throw them all in a Tupperware, put the lid on it so you know no mice and things are going to get in there, label it, put it in the basement or store it somewhere, maybe where it's not going to be freezing the whole winter. And it'll be easy to pull back out, grab that picture, put it back together, no problem. So this is the standard that you all probably have, a mixture of the assembly, but it's the standard fertigator if you do have that. Some of you may not. Then we've got our pressure reducer. This is a 15 PSI, which is what the drip tape prefers. You can also go down to 10 if that's what you have. We have a check valve. This is a 3/4 inch check valve here. The one on the bottom is a larger check valve. They both work. And then you're going to go right into the main line there. So just unscrew everything that can be unscrewed. If it's glued, don't worry about ungluing it. There's not going to be any issue there. Just remove it from your lay flat there with that hose clamp. All you have to do is undo that hose clamp and your lay flat will come right off. And the same goes for the other side of your assembly, the side that's hooked up to your pump. That will also just unscrew right there, and then your pump is good to be pulled away from the tunnel. You're also going to want to store your pump somewhere where it's not going to freeze, or cover it the best you can if you don't have covered space. Wrap it up, put it back in the box, and we definitely want to keep that away from mice and that really hard temps. And then the fertigator. So one thing I just wanted to touch on while I've got you all, if you do have this fertigator and you haven't used it and you don't know how to use it, you can look online. You can find different fertilizers that are soluble, water soluble. That's the big thing. You're going to want a water soluble fertilizer to put into this tank. And then those of you who are organic, the only water soluble fertilizer that I'm aware of, and please drop more in the chat if you've got them, but is a sodium nitrate that can be used for organic certified. So this is the inside of your pump. The very, very far picture to the right is kind of where the sand will be once you're done for the season. It shouldn't be below that minimum line. So, you know, this is something to be mindful of, which is why I put this picture in here just to show you all. This is the kind of lid that you're going to need to refill the sand. I wrote that on there. Obviously, that doesn't come from the manufacturer, but you're definitely going to need that to refill your sand. And then this is the sand that you will, a type of sand that you will need or want to buy. You need to buy a silica sand or a glass sand. Like standard playground sand does not work. And you do not want to reuse the sand season after season. You know, think about it, it's filtering your water that you're capturing. So it's probably full of bacteria and, you know, there's really small debris that it's pulling out, and probably just shouldn't be used year after year. And then you all may ask what these really weird black grommets are taped to this sandbag. These are the grommets that you need to make this pool pump adaptable to your assembly. So to that 1.5 or 2 inch male pipe thread that's going to go into your crinkle hose. That is going to be necessary, or else you're going to have a big leak. And these are kind of hard to find. Yes, it is just a piece of rubber, so you could make it yourself, but to go out into the store and find the 1.5 rubber grommet is not easy. So hold on to them, because once you unscrew it from your crinkle hose, they're going to fall out and you're going to lose them. So this is our main line, lay flat, blue lay flat. There's a lot of different names for this. Some of you may have the 1.5 or 2 inch orchard tubing, which is the same deal. It just does not lay flat. It stays hard and firm. And then, you know, as you see down here, this is our standard drip tape with the valves. And then you see the little end cap with the blue at the very end there. So when we are cleaning this up, first thing is we're going to have to remove our ground cover if we have ground cover over top of our drip tape. And if you all are struggling with serious weeds in your tunnel, this may be, ground cover may be your next step in trying that out next year. Just goes right over the drip tape and you can irrigate under the ground cover, and it works quite well. So you're going to want to remove your ground cover. You're going to want to take your end caps off of all your drip tapes. That's the one with the blue knob at the very end. And then you're going to want to flush your system and then drain it as much as you can. If you're on a slope, you may want to try to lift it up to where you're draining all the water out. Get creative with it, but there's ways to get out, to get the water out as much as possible. And then you're going to put your end cap back on. The reason why we have to do this is because, just like I said before, mice and other rodents are going to want to get in there. They're going to want to tear it up, chew it up. Spiders lay nests and eggs. It just gets messy and clogs up over time. So it's really important to get your end caps back on, and then sanitize them as well, like I said before. And then once this stuff is all rolled up, I'm going to go into how the best ways to roll up drip tape after this slide. But utilize the time that your tunnel is dormant. Clean the weeds out, add organic matter, build your raised bed that you've been wanting to build for 4 years, things like that. Just utilize the time while you've already got all that stuff pulled out and there's nothing growing in there. Yeah, I would recommend you use that time. And then also all of disease, pests, and things like that, they live in the soil, or they can live in the soil, especially in a warm tunnel that's warmer than outside. So if you've got a bunch of trash laying in the tunnel, or just like offcuts of drip and, just random stuff, be great to utilize that time as well while you're in there with the trash bag and just clean all that out. So a little more on drip tape. Before we roll it all up, if you all know that you've got holes in your drip tape, or have the time to go through and look for holes as you're flushing it out, it would be great to go ahead and just throw on some couplings where you've got holes, and then you can roll up your drip tape without the holes to where you got a fresh rolled up, system ready for you as the season starts of the following year. And then, like, the size of the mill does matter. So like I said before, some of you may just toss it every year, and that's okay. If you're buying like an 8 mil, or if that's what you have, some of that stuff just isn't going to last another season, especially if you're in there a lot and you're working with it a lot and moving it around. It may not be worth your time to try to roll it up and keep it picked up for the winter. We carry a 15 mil drip tape, and I know of several producers that have used it season after season. It's just a matter of maintaining it the best that you can year in, and then also when you're storing it. Like I said, organize and label, it goes a long way. If you all have like a bunch of tunnels, or you have a bunch of different plots in your field of different lengths, it would be smart to label all the drip tape, or gather up all the drip tape that's of one size or one length, and label, store, roll it all up and then store it together to where you don't have to worry about going to find that one length, in a big old pile of a bunch of stuff. So that's one thing to think about. And then, how do we roll the drip tape up? This is like the question of the questions. I would love to, I can't see the chat box right now, but I would love to hear what you all do after I go through a couple of ideas and things that I've seen in the field and have done in the field. So one is just taking the original spool that the drip tape comes on, if it's empty, and rolling it back up onto that spool. And the way that you can do that is you put a piece of conduit through it, or just some sort of straight tubing that'll fit through the hole of the spool, and you can straddle that on a ladder. I've used cinder blocks before, and then you can roll it up like that. For those of you who are really creative, I've seen some folks, excuse me. Marking on that. All right, sorry. You can use a drill. You attach a drill to the conduit if you can figure out a way to adjust the conduit to the spool and use your drill to roll it up as well. A garden hose or one of those extension cord rollers works super great. And then a new way that I've just recently ran into, which I would be interested to try, is, I wish I had a picture of this, and my apologies for not having one, is taking a piece of PVC, like a pretty fat piece of PVC, 1.5 inch or 2 inch, and making it like 8 feet long. And then you're gonna lay out all of your drip tape like together, like really close together, like all in lines. And then you can untwist them and organize them and making sure they're all nice and straight. And then you can actually lay a piece of tape over them like this way, like if all your drip tape's going like that, like horizontally, if your drip tape's running vertically, and then you lay a piece of tape on it. And so that's going to keep your drip tape from crisscrossing when you're rolling it up. And then you can actually just kind of roll your entire drip tape up like a burrito, I guess, if you want to think about it, or like rolling up like a tarp in like a circle. And then you just roll all of that up. And by the time that you get down to the end of your drip tape, you can also then duct tape that to the PVC itself. And then create like a huge spool of 20 pieces of drip tape or more. It is a lot of, it looks like it's a lot of untwisting and cleaning up at the very beginning, but I think once you get that system down, it'll go by really quickly and save a lot of time and frustration of you unkinking and realizing that there's a bunch of holes in your drip tape because of the kinks. And the kinks don't really create a hole, it's just the wear and tear of you moving that drip tape around with the kink in it is eventually going to create like a hairline fracture. So here are some pictures of some orchard tubing. Orchard tubing actually is a bit more resistant to freezing and things like that. But it's just like the drip tape protocol. You're going to want to drain all of your tubing the best that you can. If you are leaving it in the tunnel, you're going to want to drain it after every use, and make sure that those lines are cleared out, because it will bust and break, and orchard tubing is a little bit more expensive by the piece from my understanding than drip. And leave your emitters facing up. So that is pretty much it, you all. I have got one last slide here. This is a little quirky slide that I created, but this is a pumpkin that I had carved a couple of years ago, and just had a lot of fun carving a high tunnel into a pumpkin. And just relax. Now that you all have done all that hard work, and you can kick back and chill out by the wood stove and just enjoy your winter, and not have to worry about your drip tape. So yeah, that's it, guys. Please ask any questions. Now's the time to ask me any specifics that you have on water catchment or irrigation. Here's my contact info and on Grow Appalachia's website. We also have a pretty active website there if you all haven't been, so please check that out. I'm going to quit sharing my screen here, and so I can check out the chat, or Mark or Chris, go ahead and ask away if anything dropped into the chat.
There was a couple of things. One, there was a question about what do you do when your tanks overflow? What's the current rule for NRCS?
So I'm sorry, it was asking
about your overflow, like what happens when your tanks overflow from too much water?
Oh, well, there should be an overflow. So on those black 550 gallon tanks, there's an outlet at the very top of the tank, and you can run that, through PVC and out, away from the tunnel. The NRCS requires that actually off of 2 tanks, one on each side. They're all plumbed together, but they do require an overflow on each side. And the overflow just goes 10 feet away from the tunnel through a PVC line. And you can do it that way. I've also seen a lot of people do the kickball method, where you have to add a couple of extra pieces, but it somehow clogs the top of the tank, and then it creates an overflow from out the other side. So that's all that I know of. Mark, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, you just want your overflow to not impact your site. So make sure your water is preferably running downhill to an area that can handle the additional water, because it will overflow at some point. And then Judy had an idea using Christmas light storage hangers for hanging your or putting your drip tape up. And then there's some other conversations that aren't, I don't.
Okay, great. Well, feel free to ask me any questions over email, y'all. I'm gonna hand it over to Chris McKenzie here, since we are on a tight schedule tonight. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Kayla. First of all, welcome everybody. I see some very familiar faces and some of you who are new, so welcome to everyone. So glad you're here tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about soil and drainage in your high tunnel over winter, and how to maintain some of those aspects. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and I'll just want to thumbs up from my team, make sure that we've got that going here in presenter mode. Everybody see that okay? All right, great. So again, we're talking about soil and drainage over the winter and managing soil moisture in your high tunnel. So really we've got two problems that can occur. We've got the issue of too much water, which is frequently what we encounter here in Kentucky. And then we've also got an issue of not enough water. So if you are planning on producing over the winter in your high tunnel, you need to figure out how you're going to do that, particularly in freezing conditions. But there's also some other little factors like salt buildup that we'll talk about. So why is too much moisture an issue? So first of all, we can run into the soil compaction. You know, if we've got especially heavy clay soils and it's muddy all the time, especially in your pathways, that soil can get really compacted and it's just hard to work. And so if we're not managing the moisture in our soil, we can run into that problem. If we have saturated soils, it can have an adverse effect on soil health. All right, so organisms in the soil need oxygen to breathe. So to have a healthy soil system, we also need oxygen, and so having muddy soils for long periods of the year is problematic. Of course, we don't want muddy working conditions. It's going to keep you from getting out there and working as much as you should. And so trying to keep, especially your pathways and things like that, nice and dry so you can get out there and do what you need to do throughout the winter and other times of year. And then, of course, there's other problems, including root rots and other moisture-related disease issues that you can encounter. So, some solutions, trying to keep that soil in your high tunnel from being just a muddy mess. The first place that we need to think about that, especially for those of you all who don't have high tunnels yet, is the site selection. Where are we going to locate the high tunnel, especially in relation to slopes and other terrain features? Another factor there is other waterways, right? Especially here in eastern Kentucky, we've got these floods that can come up. And so if you've got your high tunnel in the bottomland, we can run into flooding issues. And we've had several producers this year that have had to really scramble to keep flood water from carrying away their high tunnels. They had to cut their plastic so that the water could flow through. So, you know, if you can find a higher site somewhere that's not prone to flooding, that can be ideal. And then, of course, locating the high tunnel somewhere where you have good soil. If you've already got compacted soil, or if you've got heavy clay soils, if you've got another site that you can choose that has better drainage, there are a lot of factors to think about when siting a high tunnel, like sun exposure And so it may not always be possible to keep your high tunnel in a place that's not going to have too much water, but we'll talk about how to address that in the next step. All right, so if we've got a situation where we maybe don't have the best soil drainage, or we do have, we do have our high tunnel positioned at the bottom of the hill. Say you look at this example here in this graphic. You've got water running down, and it's not just the water that's coming off of the high tunnel, but it can also be water that's flowing from uphill. And, water moves through the top layer of the soil. And so we'll have water infiltration from the sides. And some of the ways that we can address that are through French drains or grassed waterways, diversion ditches, in some cases drainage tile, to help catch water as it comes down from a hill and move it around or away from a high tunnel. Now, one option in terms of, if you've got water runoff and you've been having issues with your gutters or any other system, or if you plan to be producing a lot over the winter but still need a way to catch the water, we've got to remove the gutters in the winter, right? But we could locate, some French drains to the side of the high tunnel. That way, as water sheds off of that, it's being caught in the drains and moved away from the high tunnel. Another way to deal with that issue can be using beds that have been hilled up. I call them raised beds, but a lot of people confuse that with, the wooden boxes or frames. No, these beds are just hilled up 4 to 8 inches so that the places where you're growing your plants aren't going to be inundated with water all the time. Now, you still have to deal with your pathways, but at least, especially if you're producing over the winter and you do have drainage issues, this can be a helpful technique both in and out of a high tunnel. But just because you've got that plastic covering doesn't mean that the raised beds won't help, especially keep that root zone drier so that your roots just aren't standing in water. You got to think about the way that you run these beds, because if you run them against the slope, you may end up catching water in your pathways. If you run them with the slope, those pathways will be able to drain out. Of course, organic matter, soil organic matter helps to manage moisture, and it absorbs water. And so something like cover crops can improve infiltration in the soil and hold the soil into place so it's not being, so you're not having any soil loss. Say if you do have a situation where you're on a hill and water's coming in, that cover crop can hold the soil in place. And of course, cover crops increase soil organic matter, or can increase soil organic matter, as can compost or natural mulches or animal manure. So all of those things can help your soil manage moisture. Natural mulches work to improve the soil health, improve working conditions. So if you use some natural mulches on your pathways, it can help have something to walk on besides just mud, like we talked about earlier. Now they are going to act differently in a high tunnel system because we don't have that overhead rainfall factor, and so natural mulches tend to break down a lot more slowly in high tunnels. And I've noticed that with a lot of the producers that we work with. So just keep that in mind as you think about your system. Okay, so not enough water is also an issue in high tunnels in Kentucky because we don't get that overhead rainfall. So what that usually means is that we don't get that flushing effect that we have in the open field of rain hitting the soil for prolonged periods of time. And so what can happen is an accumulation of salt and nutrients. Soluble salts are something that are found in fertilizers, manures, in city water, Those salts can build up over time when you're using just a drip irrigation system and you don't have overhead water. Dry soil, just the same as wet, can have adverse effects on soil health. So organisms not only need that oxygen to survive, but also some moisture as well. And water's needed, of course, for your winter crops, right? We can produce crops 12 months out of the year here in Kentucky. And so that's one of the advantages of having high tunnels is you can have 2 or 3 crops in a high tunnel through the course of a year, maybe many more if you're growing a short season thing like radish or lettuce. So we want to set ourselves up to be able to use the high tunnels throughout the season. So again, fertilizer and manure contain those salts, and there's no rain to flush it out, so they'll accumulate over several years. And the way that we're going to address that is by optimizing soil organic matter. That is going to be helpful. Again, the ways that we do that are through cover crop, manure, compost. Utilize testing. So you all should be getting a soil test in your high tunnel at least once a year. And you can request a soluble salt test. Sometimes it's free, sometimes there's an additional cost, but it is worth monitoring that so that you know when that buildup gets to a point where it's problematic. And then, of course, using cover crops, you can help fix nitrogen with legumes so that you're not applying as much salty fertilizers. So those can be helpful as well. So here's an example of a soil test that's got the soluble salt level here. You see it's 0.218. And so we look over to interpret that, and we see that that's not even close to something that would have an effect. So anything below 0.4 is going to, the salinity effects are going to be mostly negligible. But as it goes up, you can see that it starts to build, and most producers aren't having to worry about this the first couple of years in their high tunnel. But again, as we add those things, it builds up over time. And so soil test is the best way to monitor that. And I'll talk about here in a minute how we address salt and nutrient buildup. All right, so most of us are going to be removing our plastic every couple of years anyway. Most manufacturer guarantees are for 4 to 6 years for greenhouse plastic. And so in order to keep that plastic from becoming opaque over time, it starts to age and you don't get as much light penetration. We'll want to remove and replace that plastic. And when you do, it can be really beneficial to keep that off for several months, especially if you can have that several months during a rainier time of year, and that will actually flush the salt and nutrients out of your soil, just like it does. Salt buildup isn't a big concern in open field production because of the rainfall. So if you can allow every couple of years for that soil to be flushed, that can be really helpful. Another issue with not enough water, dry plantless soil can be really hard on your soil biology, right? And soil biology isn't just about the bad stuff. We're not talking about pathogens here. We're talking about all of the beneficial soil biology that helps plants be healthy and thrive. And so if you're not producing in your high tunnel, it's really beneficial to plant those cover crops so that your soil microorganisms have something to eat and so that they're protected. And so that, cover crops are going to help seal in moisture into the soil, right? And another solution might be able to utilize some of those natural mulches. So again, those organisms have something to eat and break down, and the mulches will help seal in some of the moisture as well. Just a note, a lot of folks are using black plastic whether it's the woven weed barrier or some of the just your traditional plastic mulch. But if you keep that in your high tunnel from year to year to year, what can happen there? First of all, a lot of that stuff's break down in sunlight, so you're reducing the lifespan of that. But you can also get overwintering pests and disease, including black widow spiders, which is something that several high tunnel producers have come to me about. There's one lady whose husband is blind, who works in the high tunnel, and it's just been a mess having those spiders in there. But it's so warm and so dark that it creates a perfect habitat for some of those things. All right, so if we're growing winter crops, whether it's cold outside or not, some of those crops are going to require water. Now, I say that with the caveat that throughout the winter, water needs are going to be drastically less than at warmer times of the year, especially from about mid-November to the end of January, where we don't have enough sunlight quantity or quality to allow plants to actively grow anyway. They'll survive, but they're not growing much and they're not respirating much all throughout the winter. It's cold, and so you need a lot less water for your crops throughout the winter. And freezing conditions outside and inside the tunnel. I mean, really, most of our tunnels are going to be unheated, and so that can be a challenge in terms of water. So here are some solutions. You can locate a frost-free hydrant inside your tunnel so that you do still have access to water. That frost-free hydrant works in a way that allows the above ground portion to drain out so it's not freezing and bursting. And so you'll want to install the water lines at least 24 inches deep to avoid the water lines being frozen. And you may need to use some insulation in some places, but you can still have operable water, and it's really ideal to do that as close to the crop as you can, so that you don't have to roll up hoses or drain different things. It's better to have all of that on site. If you're going to use your drip tape, you need to flush after every use so that water doesn't freeze inside. You also need to flush the valves, drain the filter, because the filter can get water and then ice, and that's destructive to the filter. And of course, leave your drip emitters pointed up, so that way any water that's left in the emitters aren't dripping out and starting to freeze. And so to do that, we're going to do really infrequent and deep soakings, right? We don't want to have to deal with this very often, and we really don't need to. And so, but particularly, let's say maybe the situation is February and you're trying to get a crop established in the high tunnel, you will need water to do that. And so that's can be a situation where you're both encountering freezing temperatures, but also need some water as well. And so you can still use the drip irrigation with the considerations that I have above, but you just be mindful about that freezing factor. That's all for me. Of course, I'll open it up now to questions. If you have questions for me or for anybody else in the crew, please drop those in the chat. If you do want to come unmuted at this point, we can open it up to some of those types of questions as well. So let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what your experiences are and how we can help.
All right, Chris, I'm not seeing any questions directly related.
There was a question at the beginning that I answered, but just in case those of you are on a phone or something that did not see the question or answer. This video is going to be available on our YouTube channel very soon, as well as all of our other videos that we have created throughout the past 2 years, or even a little bit longer before the pandemic started. We will send you a link as soon as we get this put together, as well as a link to some resources that we're going to have for you all for reference, articles to read, things like that.